Welcome to Bike First Volunteer Training on Trauma. I'm Dave Stewart, the Bike First Behavior Coordinator and Safety Director. I have been working with this camp since 2016. In this training, we are going to talk about what trauma is, how it can impact people, including ourselves, and how we can support our riders in a trauma-informed way. The goal of this training is to help make you more aware of trauma. I've spent years working with children highly impacted by trauma and taken multiple master's classes on trauma, and there is still a great deal for me to learn. This presentation is not intended to make you an expert, but hopefully will be a refresher for those of you who have learned about trauma previously, and will be a start in your lifelong education about trauma, its potential impacts, and ways we can support those with trauma. This training may bring up difficult past experiences from your own life. If at any time you need to pause the video and use the tools you have learned to address those impacts of trauma in your life, you are always free to do so. If you need help, ask for help. There are resources listed on the screen now, including Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, Crisis Text Line, National Suicide Prevention Hotline, and the Youth Line Text. While many of us have experience working with trauma-impacted people and are knowledgeable about trauma, none of us are clinicians. Our job is not to diagnose any of our riders or to pry into their pasts. While it is critical that we build relationships with each other and our riders, we are not investigators. ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. These include physical abuse, emotional abuse, and sexual abuse, physical neglect and emotional neglect, mental illness, incarcerated relative, mother treated violently, substance abuse, and divorce. It is important to know that just because a person is exposed to traumatic events does not necessarily mean they will be impacted by trauma, but more on that later. In addition to adverse childhood experiences, trauma can be a result of adverse community environments. The one freshest in all our minds is COVID, but it can also be things like systemic racism, community poverty, neighborhood violence, environmental catastrophes, think floods, volcanoes, earthquakes, etc., gender oppression, authoritarianism, genocides, and many more things we all strive to end. Out of a group of 30 students, how many ACEs does each student typically have? Remember that this does not consider adverse community environments, only adverse childhood experiences. Studies conducted before COVID-19 found that in a typical American classroom, out of 30 students, 6 had 0 ACEs, 5 had 1 ACE, and 6 had 2 ACEs. So only 17 out of 30 had 2 ACEs or fewer. 10% or 3 students had 3 ACEs, 23% or 7 students had 4 to 5 ACEs, and 10% or 3 students had 6 ACEs or more. Current research suggests that COVID-19 should be considered 1 ACE for every student, and many of our riders experience adverse community environments. Statistically, you will work with a rider at this camp who has experienced multiple traumas. There is a great deal of research and evidence demonstrating how the higher an individual's ACEs are, the more likely they are to experience negative health outcomes and have an increased likelihood for many negative societal outcomes. This is beyond the scope of this training, but it is important to be aware of, as is the fact that studies of the children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors have helped researchers demonstrate that trauma is passed on genetically for 7 generations. There are different types of trauma, and individuals respond to trauma differently. A single event can be enough to have a lasting impact on a person, while a sibling might face the same trauma multiple times and not show signs of being impacted. For children affected by trauma, there are measurable neurological impacts. These can include changes in the structure and function of the brain, decrease in size and connections within the brain, and crucially for us at Bike First, it can impair emotional self-regulation and behaviors. Trauma is hardwiring developing brains to be more reactive. This is nature's way of keeping us alive. When faced with a threat, we all need to be able to fight, take flight, freeze, fawn, or, as new research indicates, falsify. This means you see a big scary lion, you are going to either defend yourself, fight, run away, flight, keep perfectly still and hope it doesn't see you, freeze, go all cute and try to make it think of you as its cuddly little kitten, fawn, or your brain is going to put together a big lie about how there is a whole lot more tasty food just waiting for the lion on the other side of that ridge, so there's no need to bother with eating you. Falsify. These are great survival strategies. The problem is, trauma increases the reactiveness of the amygdala so that people respond in this fashion, not just to lions, but to people wearing red shoes, unexpected noises, or any number of other things that often the child themselves is not even aware of. The first step in supporting riders is to have a general understanding of trauma. The second step is to know yourself. Just as when you are on an airplane and the safety instructions tell you to put your oxygen mask on before helping those around you, you need to take care of yourself and be aware of the impacts of trauma on you before you are truly able to support those impacted by trauma. This can be a lifelong journey, so we are not expecting you to have mastered it before volunteering at Bike First. Here are some basic things to keep in mind. Be aware of your emotion and your body's signals. Things like racing thoughts, quickened and/or shallow breathing, and increased heart rate. If you find yourself becoming frustrated, upset, angry, scared, or in any other emotional state that is making it difficult for you to interact with a rider, it is important to ask for help. We are all here to support you, but we need to take breaks occasionally. When you tap out, communicate with your leader that you need a minute. During this time, do grounding activities. Use breathing strategies. Get a drink of water, and/or use an effective strategy to help regulate your thoughts and emotions. Working and helping those impacted by trauma can cause secondary or vicarious trauma. So it is important to take proactive steps to take care of yourself. Exercise, which will not be a problem during the week of Bike First. A healthy diet and sleep. Doing enriching fun things with friends and loved ones. And being mindful and practicing gratitude, or whatever you find that recharges you in a healthy pro-social way, will help you with your resiliency. This is much more likely to occur when working in a much more stressful and challenging environment, but it is a critical aspect of trauma to be aware of. Also, to help us all stay positive, it is important to know that brains have plasticity. This means they can and do change. People impacted by trauma can learn new skills and have new experiences that help undo some of the impacts trauma has had. Remember, this training just covers the basics, and we do not expect you to be a trauma expert before working with riders at Bike First. However, with this introduction to trauma, its ways of impacting people, and its ways of impacting us, we are ready to discuss some strategies you can use when working with riders. The good news is these strategies work for all people, not just people impacted by trauma. The first thing we want to do is be predictable. With heightened reactivity in the amygdala, trauma-impacted people often enter a state of hyperarousal, that fight or flight we covered. Being consistent and predictable decreases hyperarousal and the likelihood of someone becoming activated. Next, be intentional about space. It can take time to regulate, often meaning activated individuals need a certain amount of space from others. Be mindful of what your body is communicating to the rider. Take a passive stance, standing next to them, not right in front or over them. Have your hands at your sides. Hidden hands can be threatening. Also, make sure you are thoughtful about what you are saying and how you are saying it. At this point, less is more. Keep your communication caring, but to the point. Your tone should also be lowered, calm, and slowed. It is critical that you are supportive, but also set clear limits. Another training will cover this, but we use if-then and first-then language. Clear boundaries help provide a sense of safety and predictability, and remember to avoid power struggles. Our goal is to make each rider feel safe, physically and emotionally. We also want them to be on bikes as much as possible. There may be times, though, when they will benefit from accessing some of our social emotional regulation tools. With your leaders and staff support, you may be asked to help the rider go to a safe place within the camp to access these tools. The goal of this is to help the rider regulate their emotions. A key component of emotional regulation is co-regulation with others. Self-regulation is a skill we have to learn. This typically happens from birth through our early to mid-20s. As a parent, I help my infant calm down by laying him on my chest and calming my breathing, heart rate, and physical movement, or standing outside holding him, pointing out different things I see, hear, smell, and feel in nature. For my teenage son, I more explicitly say what I am feeling, why I am feeling that way, and what I will do to address it. This strategy is part of our trauma-informed practice at Bike First. Help an upset rider emotionally regulate by modeling how you regulate your own emotions. Tell them what you do to calm down. Share a breathing strategy you use. Tell them a funny story. And remember to care and connect. Once the rider is more regulated, you can help them process what they have just experienced. For example, I saw you got upset when your bike fell over. You seem pretty mad, but you checked yourself out to ensure you were okay, then went with me to get some water. I know water helps me calm down. Did the water help you calm down too? That's great. Now that we know you are okay and calm, it is time to get back on the bike. Remember, Bike First teaches the skills to ride a bike. Part of riding a bike is being safe, feeling connected, and becoming more resilient. By practicing these trauma-informed skills, we are helping each rider not only be successful at camp, but also develop skills they can use throughout life. Having watched this video, can you define trauma? Describe some of the ways trauma impacts people, and think about ways you will support our riders? This is only an introduction, and we are happy to answer your questions. If this information is new to you, we hope you take away some tangible strategies about how you can support our riders and each other, including being predictable, providing space, and using regulation strategies. The most important thing to remember is that by volunteering at Bike First, you have already demonstrated your commitment to inclusion, helping others, and having an amazing week. Thank you for your time.